Good morning again, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to those who have been in the studio. Those who have been in the platform. Welcome to those who are just joining now. Now, this is the second speaker that we'll have here for the day. And I am glad and quite delighted to introduce to you John Willis. John Willis is the Managing Director of Nielsen Sports Africa. What Nielsen Sports does, it's to measure sponsorship and to check the value of the sponsorship. And I believe this is the man who you should be quite listening to today, because as I know, most of our affiliates, most of our sport codes do not have sponsorship or are still seeking sponsorship. And John is the man who can help you to say, look, if you want sponsorship, these are the areas that you should be looking at. These are the issues that you should be taking to potential sponsors to bring them before yourself. So he will be speaking about the changing value of sponsorship today. And without much further ado, I will not want to destroy what he's going to present and usher him onto the stage and say, John, you are welcome. The stage is yours, Mami.
Thanks, Thabo. I appreciate it, and morning to everyone in Botswana and Africa around the world. Thanks for the opportunity to present these sort of marketing trends from a Nielsen point of view. We put together sports marketing sponsorship trends on an annual basis. And 2021 is no different to putting those sort of trends together. Interesting year or 2 years that we've had in the sports sponsorship space over the last 2 years, be it that we have come all the way to sitting in a virtual conference where I can present to you, and I'm sitting in Johannesburg, and you might be sitting right around the world listening to these sports sponsorship trends. So I'm going to give you an overview of the sports sponsorship trends that we've picked up, and then the whole idea of why we say the change in sponsorship value is that we really try and look at a sports sponsorship trend, what's happening in that space, where's it moving towards, and then how is it impacting the measurement side, how is it impacting the commercial sense of value from a sponsorship point of view. So it's a mixture between looking at a trend and then looking at that trend from a measurement point of view and a valuation point of view, and seeing how that has affected it. So I'm going to be picking up on 5 trends this morning: new sponsorship entrants into the market, the athletes and the platforms that the athletes have with cause marketing, the crowded media mix, the fan touch points, and all those amazing things that we've got going with this virtual world, and then the sales impact and how much more of a sales impact sponsorship has to have. And it's not just about building a specific brand. So those are the 5 topics that I'm going to be touching on. If you've got any questions, please send them through. And if I can't get to any of your questions, I'm sure Thabo, you can share my contact details with everyone, and you can reach out to me personally if you want me to answer any of your questions. So let's get into it. The first one is the new sponsorship entrants from a global point of view. We've had the pandemic taking place and still currently taking place. I think it's here to stay for a few years in the sports sponsorship space. We're trying to look at what has changed in this world. If I talk about a trend, we need to talk about what's happening and where do we go from here. So China is definitely the fastest growing, fastest recovering country and economy in that space, which means that the Chinese brands are the ones that are looking for new sponsorship opportunities. The online space, online shopping, COVID has pushed us all into the online shopping space right around the world. Doesn't matter what country you live in, some form of online shopping has come into your space, which is creating new players, it's creating new sponsorship opportunities, and there could be a potential partner in your country or in your region that is wanting to get into the space, and sports sponsorship is one of those that they can definitely use to get into that space. The home training, the health space has evolved and changed with COVID, where a lot of the world was on lockdown and we couldn't leave our house, and we had to come up with new and different ways of training and staying healthy and fit. And so the fitness world, the apps, the likes of the Pelotons of the world have really exploded on a global scale. And then the gaming and esports space, massive growth in that area. If we couldn't take part in football or soccer or rugby or cricket or golf, we essentially turned to either mobile gaming or gaming on some form of console, and it grew that market quite nicely, specifically in the gaming space. And then when the esports events came back up and running, the watching of professional esports also grew. What does this mean? Shift to the East, the Chinese brands really investing, the Middle East brands investing more into the sponsorship space, new sponsorship categories coming into the market, and then increase in the esports sponsorship spend and sponsorship viewing. So let's dive into that and what that means. The Asian region, Japan, China have had massive global events, which is one thing, us in Africa are battling to pull into the country. And if you don't have a Olympic Games, a FIFA World Cup, what the 2010 FIFA World Cup did for Africa is amazing, with the amount of brands that wanted to advertise in South Africa, wanted to spend money on football development right into Africa. And we haven't had or we're missing those kind of massive big global events of Rugby World Cups, Cricket World Cups, Football World Cups, Olympic Games events, Commonwealth Games events, and I mean, for the biggest sake in South Africa, we had the British and Irish Lions tour to South Africa recently, and there were no fans, so we kind of missed out on a big global event where 50,000 UK supporters would come to South Africa and come and spend their pounds in South Africa and tour the continent and spend some money from a tourism point of view. And so, that's a big worry for South Africa, for Africa, for any country in Africa. We need to align ourselves to get big events to the market. Asia's benefiting from that, and these brands are investing in that space, so their sponsorship spend is definitely on the up. The great thing with that is these brands are then looking at a global platform and saying, where else in the world can we go and spend money? Where else in the world can we grow our platform? Which from an African point of view gives us an opportunity. So if you're looking for sponsors for your event, if you're looking for sponsors for your team, for your league, for any kind of from a rights holder point of view, the Asian brands, the Middle East brands are still definitely, they've got money to spend in the sponsorship space because they are busy growing on a global scale. We see that with Hisense. Just two examples there, PSG, how PSG have been in the news in the last couple of weeks, but the UEFA competitions, a lot of brand ambassadors, the Vivo with the IPL, Indian Premier Cricket League in India, the Euros and FIFA. So big global sponsorships and big budgets being spent on global events, global teams, rights holders, and individuals. The Middle East area is definitely still, those brands are definitely still looking to expand on a global scale, and they're spending their hard-earned oil money right around the world, be it from an ownership point of view, buying private equity in different teams, or be it sponsorship of teams, leagues, events, individuals. So those Middle East brands are definitely still there to spend their money from a sponsorship point of view. New sponsorship categories and the changes that we've seen with regards to sponsorship categories, new players coming into the space from a cashless payments point of view, not the tap and go type of payments, service providers. We've seen a kind of new banks and new financial services, businesses being opened during the COVID pandemic, and really jumping on the bandwagon with regards to making sure that it's not just somebody going into a bank and having that personal interaction with someone, but really living from a financial services point of view in the virtual space. Reduction in air travel and aviation has had a massive knock on the tourism industry, has had a massive knock on the sponsorship space. If you take the Emirates of the world, if you take British Airways of the world, the amount of money that the big Deltas and KLMs were putting into different sponsorships and different events right around the world. All of a sudden, no one can fly. All of a sudden, they don't have any income, which really, has a knock-on effect with the airlines and the travel and the travel space. Then limits on movement has really been an interesting one. It's had an upside and it's had a downside. I guess the virtual world, I'm sitting in Joburg presenting to you in Botswana and right around Africa and around the world. It's had the positive side, but it's also had the negative side where we're not having those personal interaction. We're not spending money on going out for lunch after this presentation and really assisting the restaurants and the hotels in that space. So that category has really had a massive knock, and will continue to have that knock probably for the next year or two. New sponsors have come into the space and new businesses have been created. As I said, 2 examples here, Takeaway.com partnering with UEFA and replacing McDonald's, and then Cazoo, a second-hand car business. Between Cazoo and Cinch in the UK, they've really jumped on the sponsorship space and have become sponsors of many teams, leagues, individuals, events, and the 100 competition, which is a new cricket competition that is just completed in the UK. Cazoo was one of the principal partners there. And then, who would ever have guessed that Airbnb would become a sponsor of the Olympics? It's literally the virtual space of accommodation, and the Uber of accommodation has become a global player and has become a sponsor of probably the biggest event that we've got from a global point of view. So what does this mean? I mean, that's these changes. We see new brands, we see new categories, we see new sponsorship opportunities coming into the space. But also, what does that mean from a sponsorship value point of view, and how do we align that back to sponsorship valuation? How do we make sure that when we're presenting a proposal to a brand that we're still ticking the boxes in that space? So, the audience reach and the brand awareness from a sponsorship point of view is definitely still part of the space, and definitely still one of the key KPIs from a sponsorship performance point of view. But it's changing, it's evolving. It's not just the only thing that brands are looking for. There's this integrated traditional sponsorship space now, where we've got mobile and online videos, we've got social media, different OTT platforms and direct-to-consumer platforms, and so there's a lot more that we've got to consider, and it's not just the audience reach and brand awareness in that space. Then for brands, they've got to really make sure that all the different touch points and all the different opportunities that they've got, that they're able to measure them and they're able to look at them from a holistic point of view across all the media platforms. So that's the first trend that we'll have a look at. The second one is the cause marketing and athlete platforms. Definitely something that has exploded in the last 2 years, and will continue to drive as we've almost become more aware of the cause-related space. So purpose-driven sponsorships, purpose-driven brands. It's not just about milking the globe for the coal and the oil anymore. It's now, it's all about purpose. It's all about giving back. It's all about making sure that you understand what a brand is doing, what a brand stands for, what position the brand takes in that space, and what better way to drive that agenda than directly with the individual athletes. These athletes are now literally setting the agenda when it comes to taking charge of things like Black Lives Matter or Marcus Rashford. Really serving the community and serving the kids in the UK with meals and really pushing the boundaries when it comes to being an individual, and not just waiting for your team, waiting for your media manager, waiting for somebody to arrange an interview for you, but really pushing the agenda by themselves. And they're able to do that because of a lovely platform that's called digital and social media. We see Cristiano Ronaldo when the talks around him moving potentially to Man City. This is still when he moved to Juventus. He had 6 times more Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter followers than Juventus at that time. So he was bigger than the club. He was bigger than the team. He, as an individual, has massive power, massive following, a community that follows him. And if he moves to Man City, as the talks are over the last couple of days, he'll take a whole bunch of fans with him. He'll obviously make a whole bunch of fans very angry on the other side of Manchester, but he will, he still has this massive, strong growth and community that is following him. So from a social cause point of view, from making sure that brands stand for a specific cause, partnering with athletes and using the athletes' own platforms to drive that is where things are moving towards. LeBron James, same thing, millions and millions of engagements and conversations that took place when he made the move to the Lakers, which just proves, it's which one is stronger, the individual or the athletes. And at the moment, with social and digital media, the fan can connect directly with an athlete. You don't have to wait. You don't have to go through a kind of middleman or media manager, or send an email to the team and then hope that you can potentially get an interview. As a journalist, as a fan, as an individual, we can connect with these athletes directly, and if they want to respond to us like they sometimes do, they can directly engage with us. It's not just about going through kind of reading about them somewhere kind of in the distance and seeing them on the field. Really directly connecting with these fans. The younger generation and the younger audience, the younger fans are definitely pushing for brands that are socially responsible. The research that we've recently done, there's a very strong push between the 16 to 30-year-olds around brands have got to stand for something. Brands have got to take a stance. There's gone are the days where a brand can just, be the middleman, stay neutral, not really say anything when there's a pressing political matter, when there's a religious matter, when there's a racial matter, a climate change matter. These brands have really got to take a stand, and the younger generation are putting pressure on them. They're really putting pressure on them to take a stand in this cause space, and be more socially responsible, do good, and make sure that it's not just playing the neutral game and making sure that you hope for the best. Some of the examples that we're seeing, Adidas with their Run for the Ocean campaigns and using recycled plastic out of the ocean to create shoes. Nike as a brand, then the Ferrari and Mission Winnow examples are really good examples. Airbnb, again, really standing for sustainable travel. And then new brands, the Amazons and the Ball Corporation, really pushing the needle when it comes to standing for a purpose and making sure that it's not just a logo or a kind of just an advert or a sponsorship of just putting a logo out there and hoping that somebody recognizes me, but really just standing for something, making sure that it's more than just the sponsorship or more than just the advert, and that's what the younger generation want. They'll buy into your brand if you can stand for that. From a value point of view, us as Nielsen, you wouldn't expect me to not talk about the numbers, talk about the values. That's the game that we play in, and we see the massive value that is generated, the massive engagement that is generated when, number one, you have an individual versus just the brand. Tommy Hilfiger posting a specific post, getting less engagements, less value than when Lewis Hamilton posts about Tommy Hilfiger. And then when he pushes a specific cause, he pushes a specific opinion, really that's when the value jumps even higher. So, the cause marketing, the standing for a specific cause, making sure that it's not just an advert. There's so much content out there, and I'll get to that when we get to the kind of clutter space, and you'll see what I'm talking about. But you've really got to make sure that you stand out, and use an athlete. Make sure that you don't, you're not scared of using the athlete in your brand campaign, and then making sure that athlete stands for something, and that you as the brand support that athlete with whatever cause they stand for. We're seeing the number of athletes, that are posting about specific social causes just double and triple every single year, and just keep growing. Massive athletes with over 5 million followers on Instagram taking a stand, growing by 10% 2019 to 2020, and just continuing to grow in that space. From a value point of view, again, the 2019 to 2020. Just under doubling that value, and then in the next couple of years it's just going to keep growing with regards to creating that social media content by athletes, by individuals, by the so-called influencers, and defending specific causes. People are buying into that. People are engaging with that content. That's why I want to follow Lewis Hamilton, because he's got a specific cause that he stands for. That's why I want to follow any other athlete or any other individual, because they stand for something, and that they've got their opinion, and they don't just take a neutral stance to anything in the cause related space. Great example to use, very relevant now with the Tokyo Olympics, and started around the US Open. Naomi Osaka has been a change maker with regards to the space of using her individual, personality, using her individual platform, and really coming out and being opinionated. And the brands that have jumped onto making sure that they use her platform have really, benefited from that. But brands have got to understand that these athletes are going to come out with their own opinions. They are going to come out with their own stances, and you as a brand has either got to decide, are you going to support that, or you're not going? Are you going to still remain neutral? Because the individual athletes are more and more. This is what we're going to see moving forward. Tokyo Olympics was no different, with the examples that we saw coming out of Tokyo Olympics from a mental health point of view. Again, the athletes are taking a stance and not just going with the flow. They're really, doing their thing for themselves. What does this mean from a value point of view? As I said, after every trend and every kind of section, we really take it back to the sponsorship value and making sure that you understand, what does this mean for the future of valuing of sponsorships? And the athletes are now offering purpose-driven sponsorship platforms. That's where the money is. And then measurable. It's very measurable. The social digital space is highly measurable. We do a massive amount of work as a South African office with individuals and with brands in the South African space to really put a value to an individual athlete or individual influencers platform, their different posts, and giving feedback to brands. It's not just a hit and miss and hope that you can't get a return on investment there. It's really now measurable and tangible. Then the impact of athlete influence, again, it's got to be measured, it's got to be holistic, it's got to be consistent right across your whole marketing space. And then the number of fans that can be reached and engaged, we see the numbers pointing in the right direction. The 16 to 29-year-olds, they really want you to stand for a specific cause. It's not just about posting social media content for the sake of posting it. You've really now got to make sure that if you want to engage with this younger audience, then you've got to make sure that you've got a specific cause that you stand for. The crowded media mix, trend number 3 in this space. This is a great graphic that I love to use, and it's a few years old, but it's definitely still very, very relevant. And the amount of time that people spend consuming media is just massive. The amount of content that is going out there. Every rights holder that we work with on this continent, it's really, everyone is pushing to say, I've got to have a social media account, I've got to have Facebook, I've got to have Twitter, I've got to have Instagram, I've got to have YouTube, I've got to have TikTok. I've got to make sure that I've got all these social media platforms. But the reality is, there's millions and millions and millions of pieces of content that's being generated on every single minute of every single day right around the world. And it's, from a digital social media point of view, you pick up your phone and you've got access to everything around the world. It's not like you're restricted to a specific number of people that you can follow in your region or in your country. It's very global. And so, to stand out in this space is difficult. It's not as if we're just going to, as a rights holder, as a team, it's not about just creating a Facebook page and then hoping for the best and hoping that everyone's going to follow you and like your content and engage with your content. There's many thousands and millions of pieces of content that they can follow and so they don't have to follow your page for any specific region. The debate that's been taking place, and I guess from a global point of view, it's a lot quicker than what it is on the African continent. If I have to use South Africa as an example, this digital space, the OTT space versus the linear TV, the trend around the world is that it is this is where it's going, and essentially, the African continent will get there from a streaming point of view, from a digital point of view, from an OTT point of view. It is a valued, as we call it, a valued, valuable component in this marketing mix, and it is something that COVID has accelerated. We've seen the number of documentaries and the number of things that have come out from an OTT point of view. Globally, let's use a few global examples. From an Australian point of view, linear TV is still top. But watching by any other social media device or OTT device from a media sports consumption point of view, it is growing. It is growing. So from an Australian point of view, from a US point of view, from a European point of view, definitely there's massive growth in that OTT space. In the South African space, in the African space, we are there. We're probably lagging slightly behind the trend, but we are pointing in the right direction. We've got other unfortunate variables from an African continent point of view that we've got to consider: the internet speed, the cost of data, the access to cell phones, access to laptops, the access to smart TVs. In the first world of the Asia and the Europe and the States and Australia even, those things, they're beyond that. Where in South Africa and in Africa, we've got to realize that there's still, not everyone has internet, not everyone has access to cheap data. And so if you want to have a direct to consumer OTT platform, streaming platform, it does eat up a lot of their data. So the linear TV space, the free to air, the pay TV space in the South African continent is definitely still the leader when it comes to sport content and content in general. Streaming services, what these streaming services, for a number of years, we've been speaking about behind the scenes content, and behind the scenes, the fans want to buy into individual athletes' lives. They want to understand, what's happening with the football team when they're not playing on the field. Where are they? What are they doing? What are their families doing? And so, the streaming platforms have seen that gap, and they've jumped on that bandwagon with, the massive success that we've seen with Formula One and the Drive to Survive series. I see it's going into its 4th season. That's been approved, and really the behind the scenes content that is provided by that series has driven global Formula One fans, not just from a specific region, but really global fans have bought into Formula One, and then are now, spending Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays watching Formula One, where before they would never even watch Formula One. They wouldn't call themselves motorsport fans. They wouldn't even think that they would want to watch a few cars race around a track. Now, because you've got this insight into every single individual athlete, every single team, all of a sudden you are now watching the live event. Formula One wasn't the only one. The Last Dance, ESPN Netflix series. We've seen quite a few of the football clubs: Tottenham Hotspur, Southampton, Man City, and South Africa. We had the Springboks victory of 2019 Rugby World Cup, and post that the series called Chasing the Sun, which did really well on the local multi-choice DSTV platform. And so that's all about the behind the scenes content, and that's where these OTT platforms, the direct to consumer platforms, are really seeing the gap. They might not be able to get the live Champions League final, but they could potentially follow an underdog team and shoot a documentary series about them and get new fans to start using their platform and start consuming content on their platform. So what does this mean for back to the impact on sponsorship value, and where does the sponsorship value sit from an OTT digital point of view? It's definitely another channel that is going to be valued. It's not just the linear TVs, the pay pay TV and the free-to-air TVs that are being valued from a sponsorship point of view, but these new digital channels, OTT channels, these OTT services are all becoming different tools and different channels that these rights holders can use to get their content out there. There's not just going to be a broadcast deal that gets signed with one broadcaster, and that's the only one that you sign exclusive content to. In a few years' time, we could be signing exclusive, or we could be signing deals, one with Facebook, one with TikTok, one with Twitter, one with Instagram, one with a pay TV channel, one with a free-to-air channel. It's really opening up. Then you could still have your own OTT service, or you could have your own app or your own content platform where people consume content directly from you as a rights holder, which the likes of NBA have done really well from a global point of view. So there's all these different channels and different platforms that are available for us. And it's, from a Nielsen point of view, for us, it's making sure that from a measurable side, it can always go back to putting value to that sponsorship. And as I said, with the individual athletes, the OTT platforms are no different. It's really making sure that you can measure it, which is possible. Trend number 4, more fan touch points have been created. I'm sure all of you will agree, and as we are sitting on a virtual conference at the moment, we are all hungry for these mass gatherings. I can't wait to get on an airplane and come to Botswana and come and see all of you and come and sit in a virtual conference or a virtual breakfast or a virtual lunch, a real lunch or a real conference or a real dinner or breakfast. These virtual events are great, but that personal interaction, we are missing it. So what are we seeing from a trends point of view? That these mass gatherings are going to return. We're already seeing the likes of the Euros that took place. We're seeing the English Premier League. We're seeing events in Australia and New Zealand. And it is coming and going with regards to the different waves of lockdowns and different criteria in different countries. But there is going to be this gradual process of return to stadiums and to events over the next 12 to 18 months. The digital versions of events, this kind of virtual event, won't disappear. It's not something that's going to disappear. The great thing that COVID has done is it's provided us with an acceleration of this trend of digital platforms and digital virtual events. And so we're able to have this conversation virtually. And so we don't see that disappearing, but it's going to find this kind of mixture between the two. And then there'll definitely be safety protocols, different security, different access, every venue is going to have to have a different approach to phasing fans back into the stadiums. So this fan connection will exist. There'll just be this hybrid model that I spoke about. That's really going to be the trend. Finding that mixture between the two and finding the sweet spot, and the rights holders that can do that, they'll succeed. What has the pandemic done? We've taken all the fans out of the stadium. And what did we do when we took all the fans out of the stadium? We had all these empty seats. And so we had to try and fill it up with something, and be it, really putting brand names across those seats in a real sense, and pulling a banner across those seats, or inserting it graphically and putting it virtually from a broadcast point of view. And so, yes, it's great to have the fans back, but we've got to realize as rights holders that, in a season where there weren't any fans, we could have potentially over-delivered to some of these brands, because we would have delivered massive amount of broadcast exposure for them. They would never have, their logo on screen for that long. They would never have that massive brand covering 20,000 seats and being seen right around the world from an exposure point of view. So English Premier League did really well from an NFL point of view, and the National Football League in the States, same sort of thing that we saw. Many of the leagues from a South African point of view, the Currie Cup Rugby, the PSL football, all at different shapes and forms of covering up of seats with sponsors' logos and sponsors' brands. And so, we've delivered this massive additional value to these brand partners. How are we going to now that we're going to get fans back into the stadium, how are we going to continue to deliver that value to these sponsors and brands? The virtual space, it's definitely driven the rights holders right around the world to make sure that they improve on their virtual offering, make sure that they improve their technology, make sure that the fan that's sitting at home has got a really good experience, and that we don't see disappearing. We don't see the big screen having somebody zoom in on the big screen, or having fans coming into that space. We don't see that disappearing. It's really, for the first time now, you can have a full stadium of 10,000, 15,000 fans, and then you could still have 5,000, 10,000 fans that are zooming in, or that are Skyping into the session, and they could be watching, and you can see their faces on the big screen. So it's finding that mixture between the two. We've really put a lot of effort as rights holders, as agencies, as brands, I'm sure, into the virtual space and into improving this technology, because we had this gap of no fans at a stadium. And why would that disappear? There's still got to be this hybrid between those two. Two other examples: Formula One and Zoom announcing the partnership. Extreme E really pushing hospitality plans from a virtual space. So two of the motorsport rights holders really pushing the virtual space and pushing the virtual hospitality space, and not just and these things are there to stay. They're not something that's going to disappear. The mass events, the mass participation events, in a sense, the cycling and the marathons have really, they've if you haven't grabbed onto the opportunity as a rights holder in the space from a virtual point of view, for the first time now, you could, have a Cape Town cycle tour down in Cape Town with 25, 30,000 cyclists that are cycling around Cape Town, but at the exact same time, you could have cyclists right around the world also taking part on the same day, on the same racetrack, but in a virtual sense. So the mass participation events, yes, they're probably going to be the events that are going to be last to come back when we had to look at the reality world of having a 20,000 runners or cyclists taking part in an event. But the virtual space has really opened up an opportunity for them, where you'll definitely, if a rights holder or as an event owner doesn't grab onto this opportunity to make sure that this becomes part of your package, part of your offering to the fans or to the participants, then you're missing out on an opportunity, because the mass participation events, the cycling events, the marathon events, the running events, the technology is there for you to be able to sit in South Africa and run the London Marathon, or sit in Botswana and cycle the Tour de France with the professional athletes, same track, same day, and test yourself against those athletes. So there'll definitely be this blend between that, and these events have hit the sweet spot from that point of view. So what does this mean from a sponsorship valuation point of view? COVID has accelerated adoption of these technologies. Really the hybrid spaces where we're going to be seeing the fans come back. We would all love to rush back into a stadium, but there's definitely going to be this gradual return. That gradual return means that the brand's engagement strategies, the brand's activation strategies, has got to be a hybrid factor. As a rights holder, you've got to realize that for the next 2-3 years, it's probably still going to be we might have 50% capacity of fans at home in the stadium, but then we're going to have 50% sitting at home watching on TV. So how are we going to make sure that we engage with both those audience in this hybrid world? How do we make sure that we measure both of those audiences, and that we offer that to our sponsors and to our brands that are partners with our events, that we give them this kind of full scope, and that it's not just one or the other. Sales impact is my final trend in this space. It is, something that has been spoken about in the sponsorship space for many years, but it's always been pushed back to the brand awareness side of things. So sponsorship is there to build brand awareness, and sponsorship is there to brand loyalty and brand love for the specific sponsor. It's not about the logo exposure. It's you're buying into this passionate fan base. But unfortunately, from a global point of view, COVID has knocked the marketing budgets. You'll see a slide that I'll show you just now around the different industries that have taken massive knocks from a spend point of view, and it's just the reality. So if you've had a brand that had 100 million rands or $100 million as a sponsorship budget to spend on different events, smaller events, medium events, large events, have their different full kind of sponsorship portfolio. All of a sudden now that sponsorship budget has been cut in half, and now they've got to decide, where they're going to get the best bang for their buck, where are they going to get that real impact, and they start questioning that themselves. So it's not just about it's not just about the brand exposure, it's not just about the brand loyalty, but what is the sponsorship really meant to do for us? Why are we sponsoring this event? A lot of the clients that we currently working with are the brands, and the brands are asking those questions to us the whole time around, why am I sponsoring a specific event? Why have I been sponsoring a specific stadium for 20 years? We don't get anything from it. We don't know why. And so those questions are constantly being asked in the brand's boardroom, which makes it difficult for rights holders and for agencies to really position themselves and make sure that we're tapping into that space. So this trend from a sales point of view, that's the space where these brands are moving into. There's this increased pressure on brands to demonstrate this value of return on investment from a sponsorship point of view, and how sponsorship investment convert into sales. So, am I sponsoring something, and am I opening new bank accounts? Am I selling more products? Are consumers understanding my brand, and are we really getting more people to consume our service or our product because of the specific sponsorship, or are we just trying and hoping for the best that this is a brand awareness or a brand loyalty or a brand love type of sponsorship? As I mentioned, the budgets have been cut. There's the travel and tourism industry has seen a massive knock. The leisure and entertainment industry, financial services, retail, automotive industry. People are not driving around anymore. It's the reality. A lot of people are working from home. So, for the first time, it's great. The roads are quiet and there's no traffic. But people are not driving around. People are not buying new cars. People are not servicing their cars. They're not taking out insurance on their cars because the car's sitting in the garage. And that's a knock-on effect to all these different categories that essentially are quite big role players when you talk about the sports sponsorship space, the entertainment space, this industry. If we pull out all this money out of the space, there's a lot of the rights holders, the events are not going to survive because they just don't have this funding that's going to come into the space. What is this changes? Where these changes going from a sponsorship model point of view? A lot of the rights holders locally, globally, on the African continent were very rigid with regards to how they sold specific sponsorships. This is the package that I've got available. This is what I sell it for, and I don't change. I've got 3 or 4 brands knocking at my door because they want to sponsor football in my country. And this is how I do things. What we've seen now is that there's been real changes with regards to the sponsorship packages, how things are sliced and diced, how these packages are put together, very regional specific sponsorship packages, very performance-based sponsorship packages. We've seen with AB InBev and they're kind of performance-based. They pay you 50% up front, and then they value that sponsorship at the end of the deal, and they decide, should we be sponsoring or should we be paying you the other 50%? If you underperform, we're going to pay you less. If you overperform, yes, we can pay you a bonus because you overperformed. And so there's this real, performance-related sponsorship packages. Short-term product launches. We've seen it with some of the car brands. Car brands are launching their cars on a kind of very an annual cycle where a Land Rover of the world, the Toyota of the world, the BMs of the world, the Mercs of the world, the Mazdas and the rest, they all start launching their cars at a specific time, finding their gap in that specific market. A sponsorship could be aligned to that specific launch. It doesn't have to be a 3-year partnership or a 5-year partnership that you sign with a car brand. That it can just be around a very specific launch that you want to do. And so, the sponsorship packages, the sponsorships are changing. The way that we're looking at things are changing. And so, if you start asking yourselves, why am I not getting sponsors, or how can I get more sponsors in the space, you've got to have that discussion with a sponsor to say, let's change this whole concept. It's not, we're not in it to sign a 3-year contract. Let's sign a 2-month contract. Let's sign a very specific contract for the summer. Let's sign a very specific contract for the winter. It's not just about signing this 3-year contract, you getting your money and hoping for the best and hope that the sponsor will re-sign that contract after 3 years. One of the leaders in the sponsorship space, I'm not sure if you've heard of Ricardo Fort. He's used to be the former head of global sponsorship at the Coca-Cola company. He's now started his own agency called Fort by Sport, and he's one of the leaders in the space, and really one of the elements or one of the quotes that he said really resonates with us from a Nielsen point of view. And it's really trying to find that mixture between long-term and short-term, and what is the role that sponsorship needs to play for a brand. In the long term, are you building brand loyalty? Are you building brand love? And in the short term, as he says, he wants to drive sales. So in the short term, it's all about sales. In the long term, it's all about building that brand love and brand loyalty. And so, it's really making sure that how do you find that sweet spot between the two as a brand, as a rights holder, as an agency? How do we approach the brands to make sure that we pitch that to them? That yes, we're going to drive sales for you in the short term, but in the long term, 3 years, 5 years time, there's going to be this brand love towards your brand, and really finding the mixture between those two. So from an impact on the sponsorship value side of things, the value of sponsorship directly related to the ability of the partnership to generate sales. So sales is really something that's come into this mix from a return on investment point of view. It's not just the audiences, it's not just the profile of the audience, it's not just the brand exposure or the brand awareness. Sales is now becoming a very, very key KPI in the space with regards to sponsorship. And if you are presenting any sponsorship proposal to a potential brand or to potential partner, and you're not mentioning that your sponsorship in some way is going to assist them to drive sales, the brands are going to start questioning that, because they are under pressure as a marketing team, as a sponsorship team, as a commercial team, to drive commercial, to drive sales, and to turn that 50% budget, which was 100% 2 years ago, into more sales, into more customers. And so if you're not going to include that in your sponsorship proposal somewhere, you're going to miss the brands, and they're going to rather go somewhere else and find another opportunity that's going to ensure that they're driving sales, that they're driving customers back to their business. And that is the 5 trends from us. I'm not sure how we're looking on time. I think I might have ran over time slightly, but that is it from the Nielsen 2021 change in global sponsorship and trends that we are picking up. And it's been a fascinating last year and a half, and it's going to be a fascinating next year and a half with regards to us kind of returning to COVID. I think last year we were all looking at COVID and saying, in 2021, I'm going to, these are my plans. And now we're still sitting in a situation, specifically in South Africa, where we're now starting to say, maybe 2022 will be the year where we can start launching these different plans and these different elements. And 2021 is again just a year of trying to survive. Thank you. I see there's quite a few questions. Let me try and get to some of these questions to answer some of your questions. Go to the top here. Question 1, quite often when rights holders and brands need to negotiate sponsorship, the issue is always around value. What are the key factor elements that can advise both rights holders and brands to focus on? Look, essentially, hopefully the presentation has shed some light on what drives value, and I think that there's it's finding a mixture between the two. It's really brand awareness, brand exposure, the audience, the fan base that you can give access to that brand to, but then the sales side of things, the sales impact is definitely a factor that these brands are going to start pushing into it. So, if we had to look at pure value of a sponsorship, the way that we would do it, there's a whole bunch of tangible and intangible elements that go into a specific sponsorship. You've got to place value to those. You've got to understand both your tangible elements, the things that you can measure, and the intangible side of things, the things that you potentially can't measure, or the things that you can't potentially place a direct value to in terms of measurement. So that's a lot of the work that we do is around sponsorship valuation and sponsorship and really understanding sponsorship value. So if you ask that question, by all means, I'm more than happy to share a kind of more in detailed deck on what goes into that to be able to assist you. So pop me an email and I can assist you with some more factors if that doesn't answer your question. Next question. How can rights leverage esports? I assume how can rights holders or how can rights leverage esports, and when you're measuring value of esports at Nielsen, do you consider this? I'm not sure what that means, but essentially, when you measure esports, or when you measure any sponsorship or any exposure, you can measure esports exposure for a brand in exactly the same way as you would measure a concert, or you would measure a big sporting event or a big sponsorship. It's esports is just a specific touch point, or just a specific event, or there's no difference to measuring esports and valuing esports and esports events than measuring a naming rights sponsorship of a stadium, or measuring a naming rights sponsorship of a specific team. So I'm not 100% sure if that answers your question. I hope I understood your question correctly. Next one, in terms of sponsorship for individuals, teams, and competitions, leagues, how best can you advise the way do conflicts that usually arise from, especially in where sponsors for those above mentioned are competitors? So in terms of sponsorship, how best can you advise the best way do conflicts that usually arise from sponsors for those above mentioned are competitors? Don't 100% understand your question, but I hope I do. Essentially from if I understand your question correctly, in terms of different competitors in the sponsorship space, as rights holders, as teams, as individuals, or competition leagues, there's usually certain exclusivity that you would place to different categories when it comes to sponsorship. So you would have a banking partner or financial services partner, you would have a beverage partner, you would have a alcoholic partner, you would have a car brand, you would have, and those specific brands are essentially becoming, they essentially get exclusive rights to that category. And so, if you wouldn't approach two banks and have two banks sponsor one team or one league. So there would definitely be that exclusivity when it comes to sponsorship and to the sponsorship rights packages that you would offer, which generates value for those brands to know that if you are Stanbic Bank or you MTN or you Vodacom or Vodafone, and you will be the only player in for that league or for that team, that has value. That has value to the brand to know that the rights holder will protect their rights, and that they'll be the exclusive cell phone brand, or the exclusive car brand, or the exclusive automobile provider in that space. How did the advent of OTT affect the value of linear TV? It doesn't directly affected in the sense that both OTT platforms and linear TV platforms, they both got their different values. It's just another channel. OTT platforms, social media channels, all the different social media channels that there are now, all the different apps that there are now. Linear TV is one of those cogs in that system of reaching the fans. And yes, in the South African context, in the African context, linear TV, your pay TV, and your free-to-air TV is still the dominant factor by a country mile. The OTT platforms and the social and digital media platforms are growing. They're finding ways to approach a niche market. They're finding ways to engage with a specific audience in a specific way. And so, if I was a rights holder, if I had to answer this question from a rights holder point of view, you want as many fans as you possibly can. You want as many people engaging with your content as what you can. So if there's a new platform or new channel that could, assist the linear TVs and assist the pay TV and the free-to-air TV, that's great. It's another platform that can be used as a rights holder. To really drive that. From a broadcaster point of view, there's this constant fight between the streaming wars, the broadcast war around broadcast rights fees and broadcast content, and making sure that you're buying the right content and holding back the content. And in the South African context, linear TV players are definitely still the dominant players. The Super Sports of the world, MultiChoice, is still a definite massive player when it comes to the content space in South Africa and Africa, and they provide the service to the mass market that's where the fans are consuming their content. That's the easiest for the fans to consume their content. So as much as that trend is accelerating from a global point of view, the streaming side of things is still slowly picking up, but it's a small market when you have to. If I have to use South Africa as an example, it's still a very, very small percentage of the country that can afford the Netflixes of the world, that can afford the Showmax of the world. Yes, it is growing, and yes, it's going to be a player in 10 years, 15 years time. But SABC and SuperSport are definitely still the role players in South Africa. Another question here: what is a common mistake teams, federations make when seeking sponsorship? Probably the biggest mistake that we see teams and federations and leagues doing is that they take a cookie cutter approach to sponsorship. You take one proposal and you essentially relabel that proposal with 5 different brands from 5 different categories, and you send out a generic rights package to a whole bunch of brands and hope that you get a response from them. Where the advice that I would give you is make sure that you do your homework on a specific brand. Why would you be approaching a specific brand? Every single sponsorship proposal that you do has got to be unique for that specific brand. You've got to understand that brand's objectives. You've got to understand what that brand wants to potentially achieve, and then you've got to align that sponsorship proposal to those specific objectives. And there's enough data and research that you can do, desk research, and you can understand the social media platforms of that brand. You can look at who they have sponsored in the past. You can look at who they're sponsoring currently. You can look at, do they play in the free-to-air space? Do they play in the pay TV space? Who's their specific target market? And you could align your sponsorship proposal very specifically to a brand. You'll get a lot more success in that space, where the cookie cutter approach of that common mistake. That's probably one of the main reasons why brands or why rights holders are not getting sponsors. Brands, you've got to understand the big players in the sponsorship space, or even the smaller brands, are getting 10s, 20, 30 sponsorship proposals on a weekly basis. And so what is going to make your sponsorship proposal stand out to them? And is it just another football competition or just another team that's just pushing me rights, and I can put my logo all around the field and I can put my logo on the shirt, but you haven't done any homework on that specific brand. So the more homework you do on that specific brand, the better and the easier it would be for you to essentially get a sponsor or get at least a foot in the door with that sponsor and get a second meeting or a third meeting lined up with that sponsor because you've done your homework on them. I think that's all the questions. If I haven't answered any of your questions, by all means, I'm very happy for the conference to release my contact details to any of you, and you can contact me directly, and we can. I'm happy to answer your questions individually by email, or we can jump on a virtual call to discuss any of your further questions. Thank you. I'm not sure if there are any more. I see there are more questions, but we're running out of time. I'll have a look, and by all means, send me an email, and we can connect. I'm happy to answer the questions that I didn't get to. I know we've run out of time.